Hi, I'm Danny and these are my Diecast Disasters, and in this video I'm going to be doing a post-apocalyptic style custom out of this Matchbox Tomaso Pantera. This is the 1986 version of the Matchbox Pantera, and you might note it's just got a black windscreen there and it doesn't have an interior in it. And it's got a plastic base on it, so it's kind of a cheap budget version. And if you are regular to the channel, you might remember that I did a build off with Rob from Matchbox Garage a couple of months ago. We both did a Pantera, and he did mention that I had this cheaper version. So this was the original version I was going to take him on with until I got the older Matchbox version, which of course has an interior and a clear windscreen and a metal base. So we've got our budget Pantera taken apart. There's that black windscreen, scuffed old play-worn paint job. I'll just pop those wheels and axles out from under the metal suspension plate. So the next step, of course, is to remove the paint from the casting. Brush on some paint stripper there. It's not very tenacious paint, you can see it's dissolving straight away. Here it is once I've rinsed it off, and I'll give it a further clean up with the wire wheel and my Dremel. And there's the casting looking nice and clean and shiny. There are a couple of rough areas and casting lines I cleaned up with a needle file and some sandpaper as well. So here's the motor I'm going to be using to put in the rear of my Pantera. It's from a Hot Wheels tuned Mustang. Now I'm going to remove the boot cover. And that's where I'm going to put the motor sticking out and an exhaust pipe. So there, I've made a little framework out of styrene. I'll be able to sit the motor in on that. And there's an exhaust I've made out of a little piece of aluminium tube and some styrene rod. I'm not going to glue those in yet for the sake of the paint job. Next I use some styrene and a paper clip there to add some armour and a hose sort of thing. There's some more armour and mesh over the windscreen. Now I can move on to the base. Let's see, it's all plastic and it's got that post sticking up in the middle of it for the suspension. So I'm going to be adding an interior. I think this is out of an old Matchbox Escort maybe. I'm going to have to remove that post sticking up in the middle. There we go. Let's cut that off with a Dremel, and I've cut off the rear of the interior so it fits in there. And that all fits quite nicely when I put the body back on as well. Next I added some armour or bull bar there and rear bumper and a gas tank onto the base. And I also swapped over the side that the steering wheel was on and added a couple of little details on the interior. And now I can start painting it. Start out hitting the body with black primer from the bottom up. And then I painted it with silver from the top down. So it's black on the inside now and silver on the outside. Sort of shaded under that hose there. Once this is all dried, I covered the whole thing in a black wash. Here's that after it's dried, so that's given us a nice sort of shaded metal base to start working on. Next I'm going to use a piece of sponge and this stippling brush. It's just an old brush I've cut the bristles off, and I'm going to use some German red, brown and orange paint and apply some rust all over my post-apocalyptic Pantera. Mostly basically using the sponge, but I'll use that little stippling brush to get into the areas that the sponge is missing, like the edges around the armor plate. And here it is after I've applied the rust. See, I've left some silver metal areas showing through as well. Next I'm going to add some chipped paint in the same manner. I'm using light blue and white paint and some green and white I used on the armor panels on the doors. So just applying the coloured paint so that it looks like old worn out chipped off top coat of paint. And here's how it looks after the coloured paint has been applied. Next I coloured in the details, the hose there and all the silver trimmings and stuff, and I dry brushed with some silver over the armour. And next I use some black wash to shade the panel lines. While I'm doing this, just take a moment to throw a massive shout out to my awesome Patreon supporters. Thanks so much for continuing to support the show. If you'd like to help out as well, check out the link in the description down below. There's also a link down there where you can get some savings off of the Starbond super glue that I use in most of these builds. So that was all sealed with a very light coat of matte varnish. Then I used the same black and silver undercoat for the base, and again I'll apply a black wash over that. There you can see I just detailed that gas canister in green. And again I'll use a sponge and some brown and orange paint and apply some rust. Here's the exhaust pipe and the engine, some detailing. Here's the interior, giving that a worn looking paint job. And finally I've got some aftermarket wheels here that I've rusted up using the same technique as the base. So there's all the parts of our little post-apocalyptic Tomaso Pantera ready to go back together. Before we take a look at that, I'm going to make a diorama base for it to go onto. So here I have a cheap $2.50 photo frame. So I'll just pop the glass and the little photo out of that. I'll leave us with the backing and the frame. So you can see it's quite shiny. It's just made of plastic. It won't take paint very well, so I just give it a quick sanding with some 800 grit emery paper just to rough the surface up. Next I use some spray cans to give it a brown undercoat. Over this I painted some black. And then I sanded that back a bit to give it a distressed, worn out sort of look. I glue on some pieces of foam for a base structure, and then over this I'm using some filler, like spackling wall filler, to build up my ground. While this is drying, I'm going to make the tank for my diorama, or rusty water tank or fuel tank or something. So to do this, I'm just using an old toilet roll. I've cut it a bit shorter there. I glue on a cardboard top for it, just using some PVA glue. Then I've cut out some squares from some A4 paper, and I'm going to make some little rivets around the outside of my squares of paper using this cut off nail and my pin vise. You can just press the rivets in. And then I use some more PVA glue to glue these all over my toilet roll tank. Once that was all well dried, it was hit with some silver spray paint. Then a black wash applied over that. I've also made a little hole in the side there where I can fit this pipe that I've made from some styrene rod. And then the tank is well rusted all over. There it is after that's dried. Next I use some black wash to shade around the metal panels to help them stand out a bit more. And there's our finished tank after it's been shaded. Made some leak stains as well on there. Now I can go back to the base. It's dried. I also used a piece of the toilet roll to mark out where the tank was going to go. And while it was half dried, I used a car to make some wheel tracks there. So I've used some more of the filler to stick the tank in place. Once this was all well dried, I painted the earth, gave it a base coat of tan, just using cheap acrylic paint, and then I put a wash over that of a burnt umber, I think it was, a darker brown anyway. I paint over this with some watered down PVA glue. And then I use this to stick on some dried dirt. It's just clay dirt from my garden that I've dried out in the oven. That's all dried on there now. I've brushed off the excess. Next I use a dropper to apply some scenic cement. It's a mixture of water, PVA glue and matte varnish. And this will just seal in all of the dirt. And this is how it looks after that's dried. I'm going to make a vine to grow up the side of the tank. To do this, I'm using some twine. I'm just going to unwind it a bit and tease out some of the fibres. Next I dipped this in some watered down PVA glue. And then a bit gluey there, it doesn't matter. Then I tease back out the fibres to make myself my branches, etc. on my vine. There we go, after a bit of teasing. And I'll just grab the end of it with my forceps and hang it up to dry for a couple of hours. And that's given me this vine to go up the side of my tank. Give it a good couple of coats with some brown spray paint. That'll help to toughen it up as well as make it a better colour. And then I've glued it onto my tank. Next I glued on a couple of wee clumps of coconut fibre to make some leaf pads. Then I'll apply some PVA glue to these and use that to glue on some foliage. So we're just about done. I'm just going to finish it off with some static grass. I'm just using some tacky glue here. Applying it where I want the clumps of grass to be. And then I use my static grass applicator to apply the grass, and I used some clumps of old dead dry grass and some green grass mixture. And there it is after the glue's dried on the static grass. Right, so that's pretty much everything done. Let's just take a quick moment to look back and be reminded of what we started with. So here's our old 1986 Matchbox Pantera, cheap version with the plastic base, no interior and blacked out windows. But somehow it's going to make it into the post-apocalyptic future. Let's see how it turns out. And here it is, our finished custom post-apocalyptic Tomaso Pantera. Hopefully looking like it's ready to take on the wastelands, providing it can get enough fuel for that big motor, which it might find in the big tank that's on the diorama base we've made. But just before we check that out, I'll just say a big thanks to you for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, remember to like and subscribe, and check out the channel's main page for heaps more videos like this one. And if you want to see more of my content, check out my other channel, Danny's Driving Disasters. There'll be a link for that down in the description as well.